Good morning, Andrea. Is it Andrea or Andrea?
It's Andrea. Good morning.
Andrea. Okay. I was really off there. Good morning.
Morning. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get settled and finish talking to my principal real quick.
You
I'm
are
sorry.
fine. You are fine.
I'll
We're
be on.
still waiting to see if some other people are going to join.
Okay, I'll be on here in a second.
Sure. You are, you're the star here.
Hey, Miss
We had
Brown
a,
is supposed to be in here too, and she got pulled to a IEP meeting, but she'll probably try to jump on.
okay. And there are going to be lots of resources that you can share with her too. Um, so what's your role?
So assistant school leader, which is like a assistant principal. But yeah.
Okay. Been in those shoes. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started then because we are recording this as well, just so you know too.
Okay.
Um, we're going to Today we're going to explore behavior management and leading the way to student success. And we have had several of these workshops already. This is the third one for behavior management. We have three more coming up, and this was born out of feedback that we got from community schools and colleagues of yours, and just on what you all needed from us as the state support team. So areas and topics that were of interest. And so we hope that you will keep providing that feedback to us and um, letting us know how we can best support you and what your needs might be as you go through the school year. So we do have special education and co-teaching coming up next week, and then our MTSS basics and student attendance data. The other two are recorded, so you'll be able to access those if you want to go back and take a look at our other offerings earlier this month.
Yeah, I did sign up for a few of those.
Good, good. Well, we're glad you're here today. And so really meeting norms, please mute during the presentation, but since we're so small here, uh, definitely unmute. I want participation. So if you have some response or question, feel free to just, chime in and unmute yourself. Um, I want participation. And the more we share ideas as educators, my belief is that we learn from each other. I don't think I've ever sat with somebody else, a colleague or another educator, where I haven't learned something new, even if it was about a topic that I really, really felt pretty immersed in. And then kind of think about what you can take back to your colleagues as well as we go through and reflect. And if you have questions from your reflections, either reach out to me later or you know, ask them now during the session. So I'm going to be presenting, but I do have one of my colleagues, Barry Bay, who's one of our other consultants here at SST 11, who's helping me out. So if you put something in chat, and he'll be putting some things in chat as we go along as well. But if you have any questions or something, it's hard for me to see the chat sometimes, he'll let me know too, or anything, information you'd like to share. So thank you, Barry, for being there.
And I posted in there already, there's a link to the resources that Susan has. So
thank you so much. My name is Susan Webb, like I said, and this is a little bit about me. I've done everything from classroom teacher with a cart who didn't have a room to go to when I first started out, kind of thrown into the fire, all the way up to, you know, the district positions and assistant principal, programs administrator, ran a behavior unit, and done a little bit of everything. So my focus here at SST 11 is PBIS and special education. So what I want, hopefully, for the takeaways for this session is just learning about the importance and the foundations of proactive management, and really exploring how, as leaders, we can best support teachers in the classroom and school-wide. And then also being able to self-assess any current approaches that you have to behavior management, your understanding of behavior, and identify some target areas that you want to improve on or refine, maybe with a team or within your own circle of control. So that's kind of the two areas that I want to focus on. And then I have a whole section at the very end of resources and strategies, in addition to the handouts, the link to the handouts. There are a ton of resources in there as well. And hopefully you can apply those with your staff or with the students. So just starting out, I want to kind of explore this idea that to feel empowered to reach students, to be the strong supports we need to be for our students, we've got to have those great practices in place. And they have to be done consistently and with fidelity across the settings. And if you look on the right, I'm talking about that consistency and the importance. When we have students who are dysregulated, and I know that we've always had dysregulated students, but I think everybody agrees after COVID, we've seen more and more of this dysregulation. We've seen kids come from trauma, and of course, COVID was a trauma. It looks different for everyone, but we have a lot of kids and staff members and colleagues too, who experienced trauma in some way. Safety is important to feel able to learn and successful. And that consistency and routine and structure is what feeds into that need. It helps teachers feel supported and empowered to manage their classrooms. And if we think about, you know, we have the teacher shortage and people leaving education. I think the latest statistic I heard was within 5 years, newer educators, newer teachers are leaving at a rate of about 50%. So anybody that starts, you see that in about 2 years, some will drop out. And then by 5 years, you have lost about 50% of people because they don't feel empowered to do the thing they trained to do, they want to do, they maybe have a passion. And I know some people cite money as reasons and financial, but I think it goes deeper than that, really. Teachers have never been greatly paid, but usually people that go into it have that passion. We have a lot of educators, and I don't know if you've seen this at your school, who come to us not as trained in management systems. And that's either because they are working towards certification and they haven't gotten there. The universities, there is no consistency in how universities train teachers too. Some universities and will give us a good foundation in classroom management. You have some that don't spend that much time on it, and they send teachers out into the world and say, here you go. You've got all the knowledge, you've got all the instruction, but you don't have the whole picture. So I think we're finding we have teachers coming to us at different levels of comfort and empowerment. And so I think that it's really, really important that we have that consistency and the foundations in place. The last thing I want to touch on there too is we want to look at changing student behavior, but we can't do that until we change the adult behaviors. And that's really what we're more in control of. We have kids that come to us from backgrounds that maybe are not ideal. They don't have the structures in place at home. They don't have those things that we need them to have to come to school. We can't control everything in their lives, but we can control the environment and the positive structures that we have in place for them to feel safe and engaged at school. So climate and culture, we hear that a lot associated with PBIS. Why is it important? Prioritizing school safety and a positive climate allows us as leaders to decrease the barriers to learning. It improves academic success. And we're going to talk about how that is so intertwined with behavior. Academics and behavior are not two separate things that need to be tackled. They are interwoven units. They are married. And a culture and climate that breeds positivity increases that student engagement. We also look at improvements in attendance, mental health, well-being, and ultimately our graduation rates. So there's one reason why culture and climate should matter to all of us. So I could do a whole thing. I, worked as a mental health coordinator, behavior coordinator, basically the firemen going around putting out fires. And so those severe, more tier 3 level behaviors, tier 2 level behaviors, we could do a whole separate training on working with those students and de-escalation strategies and things like that. But for this workshop, I really want to concentrate on that universal layer and just understanding behavior in general. And so I think probably we've all heard behavior communicates. It tells us something. And it is really letting us know there is an unmet need somewhere. And over on the right, I've listed some things that might be the issue. When we see a student who is not following rules or having inappropriate or unexpected behaviors, what we need to look at is, what is that lacking skill? What's that unmet need? There's a mystery, a puzzle to solve here. And if we can figure out what that motivation is, what need needs meeting, we can more accurately and successfully teach that student and fill in those gaps. If you look down there at the baby, when we're infants, we react for unmet needs by screaming and crying. We need food, we need love, we need, we're too cold, too hot, whatever it is. We don't have those words. A lot of our kids don't have those words either. So they come to us ill-prepared to express their unmet needs. Kids who have been through trauma, and that's a whole other training we could get into too, really get stuck at that level of being able to express needs in anything but reactions, impulsivity. So those are kind of things we need to consider. What is this behavior trying to tell us? So I know we've seen behaviors, we've all seen behaviors, but understanding that there are externalizing behaviors and internalizing behaviors, and having that foundation of understanding is key, because a lot of times what happens as leaders, as assistant principals, as deans of students, we really focus on those externalizing behaviors. Why? Because those are the ones that are getting all of our attention. And we focus on those students. We know that their behaviors are getting in the way of their success in school, but we have students who also have those internalizing behaviors that are a little harder to spot sometimes. Sometimes that quiet child that's not disrupting our class is struggling just as much with fitting in, with behaving in a way that is conducive to success for them. So being aware that we have both of those things going on in our classrooms is really important, and what to look for. That's not an exhaustive list. In your handouts, there is a list kind of going through externalizing, internalizing, and trauma behaviors and what they might look like in the classroom. And so I think just being aware of those and knowing what resources you have to help work with those students is really important. The causes for that, again, trauma. Trauma we'll get into a little bit more. I'm going to just talk about it briefly. Discipline. Sometimes our kids have had too much discipline or too little discipline. And so that's affecting their behaviors. Communication skills are lacking. Mental health, medical concerns can affect behavior. And again, I mentioned those lagging skills, academic and social, can be expressed through the externalizing or internalizing. Those kids with the hoodies over their heads that just shut down and will not be recognized are definitely in that internalizing area. So I said I was going to mention trauma briefly. Trauma can be a whole day training, trauma-informed classrooms, responsive actions as they fit around trauma and working with students from trauma. But for our needs today, just having that understanding, that brief understanding of the effects of trauma and what it is, I think is important, because trauma affects learning. Trauma can look different for individuals, and it can be chronic. There are different types of trauma. But what we need to understand is that trauma in some way has affected deeply or left scars on students and our colleagues as well. Understanding that that can get in the way of productivity, of being on task, the ability to learn, to engage in learning. That's truly important. Our students from trauma, especially if that trauma happened earlier in life, that trauma can stunt the development of the brain. And again, that's a whole other, we can get into all the different firing neurons and the chemicals and that kind of thing. But having that understanding that we start off just like the baby in the other slide, and the survival part, that back part of our brain, that's what's developed first, because we need to survive. And students who experience trauma early, their brains do not develop. They start missing some of the connections. The neural transmitters are not working quite right. And so they get stuck in that survival brain. And that's why regulating emotions, their go-to sometimes is screaming, crying, tantrum, having a tantrum, meltdowns. They can't attend to classroom tasks as well, and they can't engage in learning. Why? Because they are in hypervigilant states most of the time. They are looking for the next issue that's around the corner, and they're trying to feel safe. So again, I go back to the foundations and laying those foundations for good behavior management, creating that safe and positive environment. That's where you're going to build that felt safety that students from trauma need in order to be successful. We're not going to solve their trauma. That sometimes that's a lifetime of dealing. We're not the counselors. We're not their therapists, but we can provide that level of felt safety so that they can find success in school. think about trauma and behaviors and those things we're confronted with, we also, as educators, as leaders in the school, as teachers, we need to be aware of our own triggers. So if I'm disciplining a student, if I'm having to do the discipline, I can know, as an assistant principal, I had to know what I was experiencing in that moment. How would I react if things got very testy, or students coming at me? What's my body going to feel like? How do I react to those things? If I can kind of get in touch with that, I can better handle the moments. I also have to consider my own backgrounds and experiences. I had a colleague one time who was a teacher, an intervention teacher, and she dealt with a lot of students from trauma. They had mental health issues, they had behavioral issues, and she hadn't really thought very much about any of her own unprocessed trauma. So I, remember her having a student who she wasn't prepared to relate so much to, which triggered things that she hadn't thought of or dealt with. And in that moment, she's aware that she starts becoming aware that the way she's reacting is not because of what is in front of her. It's because of things that she has in her own past. So really being aware of that and thinking through and helping our teachers learn to think through how they react is really important. If a teacher, they understand that family is very important to them, they are not going to react well if somebody attacks them. They're ready to take it themselves, but they don't want insults being hurled at their family or things like that. They're not prepared for that. That can be a situation where a student sees that moment and then knows where to keep pushing the buttons for the teacher. I had a principal one time who said, never let them see your goat because they'll ride it down the hallway. You have to know your areas where you might be more vulnerable, because that's going to show in your body language and in the way you're dealing with that student. Do you have any questions or comments or anything? Any input?
No, all of that was definitely very interesting, a good start, because those are things that I see every day with our kids. I'm noticing like they really don't understand healthy boundaries, healthy relationships, friendships, relationships, whatever that is, it's just unhealthy. I agree with ever since COVID, and I know we hate to like hold our head on that, like that is just everything, but it did change our children quite a bit as well as adults, that they're more physical with each other. I mean, like, it's like I remember being a middle school student as well, and I don't recall us hitting each other as much. And it's almost like that's their love language, good or bad. Like that's just how they communicate with each other. Um, and you see so much physical contact that obviously those things sometimes result in physical fights. So then you're also dealing with that. And once you actually sit them down for them to talk, I make them do the work. I didn't have a problem with this person. You did. So you need to have the conversation with them. And it's kind of hard that they don't know what to say. But I'm like, but you were so mad and you were willing to fight them. Now you don't know what you could say to this person right in front of you. So it's like doing the work with that as well. And so all of this is going to be very helpful, to give those the tools of conversation. Because at the end of the day, most of these things can really be talked out, that you don't have to be physical with anyone.
I think you've hit on some really important ideas, and we're going to kind of discuss that. Again, they don't have those skills. They've never had it modeled. They've never seen it. And so their go-to is, or maybe what they have seen has been fighting, because the adults in their life don't have those skills either. So really being able to sit them down and do some reconciliation, some restorative things, so important, because then you're letting them see and work things out. And it sounds like you're giving them the tools to work through this. And that's really important as well. So really great points. Very good points.
Like right now, I'm sitting here and I'm watching a group walk by me and they're just so loud, yelling at each other, but they're really just, they're talking. And I'm just like, you're coming off aggressive. And like I tell girls all the time when we're talking, I'm like, be mindful of like, and you mentioned your body language. If you
Yes.
are looking at someone crazy and your head is rolling and you're making all these comments, it's like, who's going to be open to trying to have a restorative conversation with you acting like that? Be mindful of how you're speaking to someone in order for us to get to the end of this conversation, because it's not going to go well. And a lot of times they're unaware of how they look when they're talking to someone. So obviously I have no skin in the game. So I'm just watching, I'm observing, and I'm like, you know, and I'm just like, you really have no idea what you look like right now, because no one's going to be open to the way you are talking to them right now. And it's like, then they start thinking and then they scale back on how they probably should have presented it. And like you said multiple times, it's just those skills that at this 11, 12, 13, 14, they have not been given. And I have to be open and say, my generation was different. And that doesn't mean that theirs is any worse than mine. But what my mother gave me, she was very old school. My mother was raised by her grandmother. So it was like I was given those tools on how you communicate. The mothers now are a little different. They're okay with you cussing people out and fighting to make your point and communicate. And that's not healthy.
Yes.
So this is for us to show them the way.
And I will say too, I've even I just moved back from Texas, and the school district I was working with down there, you know, we even had situations where parents would show up and ready to fight another parent, or wanted to tear after another student. So, you know, it's those skills, and like it's just layered. So yeah, we are the ones that have to show them. And I think too, making, you know, the more we're aware, you were talking about the way they maybe they aren't aware of the way they look. That's another thing too. We also have to be aware of what we look like, and when we are responding or actively listening to students too, because sometimes they may say things that shock us. And I've seen, you know, I've worked with teachers before who that shows on their face, and or the way that they're approaching a student. If something is not coalescing with their own background or their own maybe set of values, that can really put a barrier or a wall up between the student and the teacher. So being very aware of how we react, how our body looks, how our face looks, our tone of voice, those are all really important. And the more that we are in control of that too, the more we model for those students that don't have that skill as well.
Definitely. And I think also not being dismissive just because of your age and your experience. Um, that can be hard because, you know, we always feel like when we get to a certain tier in life, like you just know all the answers, you just got it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you do, because you have wisdom that no one else has, but still being open to how this generation is looking. It does not look the same for me. And I still have to be open to what they're going through, because you're in it and I'm not. And so that doesn't mean that I'm better than you. And so it's just, you know, being open
Yep.
and receptive to what it is that they're going through. And then I've always been taught that I can come to your level where you are, but that doesn't mean I stay. My job is to bring you to where I am, so then
I
you can
like
go
that.
past me.
I like that. That's great. I like that perspective. So, yeah, examining our own experiences. If yeah, you know, we've kind of been talking, but just thinking on a moment to reflect maybe on one behavioral challenge that you faced this year, and maybe how did you react when you were dealing with that situation? Were there things that you went back and were like, oh, maybe I should have done that, or maybe looking back now, is there a different way you might have handled something? And you can either put it in chat or we can just talk about it too, or
I can talk faster than I can text. I've been over here like, okay. So For me, what I think I've been facing more is students that have the traumas as well as ones who have IEPs and things, that a lot of the issues that are coming up is accommodations. Are we fully giving them everything that they're supposed to have, so that we're not just looking at the consequence at the end? So there's been a couple situations where those things have popped up, and it's like, could we have actually given them more outside of a suspension, which could have resulted in an expulsion? Because when you look at it and you go back, you're like, well, did they get the pullouts? Did they get the small groups? Did we talk to them? Did we give them all the tools that they needed so that this wasn't their outlet? And I think that, yes, that could have been better.
I love that. That is very insightful. And I think that's a problem that many people, many leaders, many districts struggle with, because it sometimes seems like everything's happening in the moment. So how do you step back and look at what are we not doing, or what can we do to intensify things prior to it getting to a point where you might need an OSS for a mandated infraction or something. So I think that's really important. And I think did Kelly join us too? Are you on, Kelly?
Yeah, I am.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know why. My video keeps telling me it won't turn on. I don't know what I did in here. So my perspective, so Miss Inman has a perspective about the students, and my perspective is more about the adults. We had an adult situation yesterday, a male teacher having his feelings hurt, like what you're talking about, not being able to remain neutral and not take things personally, and then demanding that a child who is severely traumatized, who has had a bunch of circumstances change in their life right now, he threw a tantrum because he didn't get what he wanted. And so then the students see that, oh my gosh, that's how we get him. And then also it just, you know what I mean? It causes that whole thing. I think there is a true lack of understanding of the impact of trauma. And I think there are people that dismiss it and say, well, everyone experiences trauma. Right.
Yeah,
we do. But there's a lot of dysregulated adults that are demanding children to meet an expectation that they themselves aren't able to meet. And Miss Inman is calm and neutral and able to work with every student, but she can't be everywhere all the time.
That's true. Yeah.
I was sad that it was just us, just me and you, Inman.
Well, hopefully there are things you can take back and use with the staff, and maybe look at PD, or looking at how you can help disseminate because it sounds like both of you have a good understanding of what the needs are. And so that's key, to even have some leaders that do understand that, to make change. But I think you're so right. I've seen that happen with, teachers who maybe are, so they feel that they've been hurt, so they want that punitive thing to happen right then, instead of looking at the whole child's needs. It doesn't excuse a consequence. I ran a mental health unit within our schools, and K through 12, we had them on every campus. And it was so hard sometimes to try to get that across to people, that even our kids who are in our therapeutic units or have trauma, mental health, we still have consequences, but we first have to have understanding, and we have to be the models. So they're watching. You're right, Kelly. That's great.
Yeah, and I think also moving past the idea that the only consequence is exclusion.
Right.
And
much.
that's a hard sell for people. They adults expect to get a second chance when they mess up, but they do not want to give the child a second chance. And some adults are more willing than others to participate in the restorative process. But because I'm at the district level, I can't control everything that's going on in buildings.
Right.
So.
No, I think you're very, very right about that. It's ingrained a lot of times. And I know one school I worked with, they it was a tough crowd. We have started one of our therapeutic units there, and it really took probably about a year and a half where we made real change with the people that were naysayers. When they walked past the room where students would be coming back to work on coping strategies, or they needed to come back and reset and take a break and just be in that calm atmosphere. Well, we had rocking chairs in there. We had different things. They were taught that kids knew they were tools, not toys, but teachers walking by would not see that. And they just, they struggled with that because they wanted ISS, they wanted OSS, they wanted, those things to happen, removal from the room. And it wasn't that restorative feel. So I totally understand that. So I think, and this kind of touches on what you said, Kelly, we offer a lot for adults, forgiveness and grace. And a lot of times students don't get that. When a student has academic errors, how do we respond? How do teachers respond? As educators, we assume that if they're trying to say 2 + 2 is 5, and we keep telling them 4, or trying to show them 4, and they keep getting 5, 6, 7, 8, we're not going to get angry and beat them over the head with punishment. We're going to assume that there are gaps in their learning, and we're going to reteach and provide support and feedback and allow them to practice until they attain that skill. It's harder, I think, and this kind of goes back to what you're saying. It's harder with behavioral and social errors because we assume oftentimes that the students choosing this behavior, they're refusing to cooperate because they want to get us. We have to flip that and really think about, what is that unmet need? What's at work here? Because 9 times out of 10, it's not that they're choosing, but maybe that's the only path they've seen. Maybe that's their identity now, and it's safe. That's their safety. So we know kids want safety. If they're safe in being the bad child, the problem kid, they're going to gravitate towards that too, because it's filling that need. And oftentimes, I think people have gotten away from this some, but like you were saying, remove the student from the context, ISS, OSS, and then assume that's going to teach them a lesson. And then you put them right back in the classroom or the context where they had that behavior. There was no opportunity to teach a skill. It was just, okay, we're going to give you this punishment. You're going to go away for a while, but we expect you to come back having somehow intrinsically learned the skill that you're lacking. We don't do that with academics, and we need to help teachers understand we can't do that with behavior or social errors too. So just real quickly, I'm going to touch on this. Like I said, we're going to focus today mainly on that universal foundation portion. I lived mainly in the intensive area, the targeted area, when I worked with students directly. But that foundation is so important. Hitting those universal supports and making sure there's fidelity and consistency throughout your building or your district, truly important, because that is, even those intensive kids need that universal to be a strong foundation in order to make any other higher tiered interventions work. Also, that continuous circle, behavior management, and high quality instruction. They are one and the same. They are continuously, things that we have to consider, because your high quality instruction, what goes on in that instruction in the classroom really impacts behavior. And your behavior management that you've set up can impact that instruction. So having teachers understand we're not looking at two separate things. We are looking at one thing that leads to student success and empowerment of them in the classroom to work towards that success with their students. So how do we promote as leaders this long-term behavior change? Well, I think we all know there's no magic bullet. I'm not going to come out with some like formula today and say, here, take this back to your district, your school, and you're going to be the champion and solve everything. There's just not, because behaviors are so different and individualized. But if we can switch that, help teachers switch that focus to what students are expected to do and not what they shouldn't do, that positive reinforcement, that's going to be really important in making those behavioral changes. Also recognizing, and I think you kind of mentioned this, Kelly, the intensified supports for students who don't respond to those universal supports. Good leaders know that, they see that. And before it gets to that, well, we're removing them from the learning environment for long stints, then we need to really look at, are there intense students that are in that upper level and need that intensive support? And what things can we try? What can we put in place for those students? I know everybody's heard relationships, but relationships are key. They're key for adults to feel that sense of belonging, and they're key for students too. So practices that will contribute to discipline issues. If we have a lack of clarity in our expectations, either school-wide or in the classroom, that's going to create that discipline issue. I'm not going to read all of those, but definitely looking at being able to correct immediately and concisely and in a positive manner, where we demonstrate what we do want them to know or the behavior we want to see. That's really important. So having those things that are happening within our schools or our districts, we really have to look at how do we support getting rid of these barriers. Safe and Civil Schools, and Randy Sprick has a model that he likes to talk about a stool. So if you have a stool and you have your classroom management models that are in place, that foundation, they're connected, they're implemented consistently, and they're looked at for efficacy as well. That's one of those legs of the stool. Clear expectations, and that's for students, for what we want with staff. That's your other leg. And then also, this one is harder sometimes, the coaching and support, continuous professional development that's relevant to their job, that's provided to all staff that work with students, and behavior and supports, and that coaching. So if you have one teacher that's really strong, or maybe that's the person that really understands that model that you have set up for the building or the district, those are mentors for your teachers that either come in late or maybe are newer and don't have that background. And when you have a stool that doesn't have all three of those legs, or one's weaker, you're going to get the wobbly stool. It's not going to be as effective at pushing our students and our classrooms towards success. And if you're missing one of those elements, your stool's going to fall over. So I've been in districts or in schools where I've seen, okay, they've got a classroom management model. Either they're at a full implementation in PBIS, or they maybe they're working really strongly in that tier 1, but their model is there. And they're clear on their expectations from what they want from students and staff and in all areas. But they're not providing that coaching and that continuous coaching throughout the year. just like we have to coach students, we have to make sure that we keep reinforcing interventions and models and ways to handle behaviors within the classroom. So if that's not there, you're seeing staff that's disconnected, teachers maybe that came on late that don't understand what the processes are, or maybe don't even understand the terminology. And so having that coaching and support is truly important, however you decide to set that up in your schools. I don't know if you're familiar with the STOIC framework. STOIC stands for structure, teach, observe, interact, and correct. And you have a copy of this in a chart form in the handouts. Through the classroom lens, those areas, those 5 areas are really important for teachers to look at daily. How is the structure organized? How's their classroom organized? How is their teaching going? Are they able to observe behaviors and collect data and then make adjustments as needed within their own classrooms? And their interactions with students and their ability to correct fluently and consistently connected to the school-wide procedures that are in place. And those are your classroom procedures. So being able to not have to stop instruction to give a correction. Those are really important for teachers. Through the leadership lens, it's very similar. We want to organize settings with staff and students that are supportive for success. And again, we are models. So our teachers delivering that instruction in the processes, when we have opportunities to lead or teach staff, are we also following those same expectations? Are we being clear in our processes, observing, supervising, and being visible? I know I've been in schools where the principals and the administrators, they're out as much as they can. They're out and visible. They know students' names. They connect with staff. That's truly important. I know I worked under, well, I was actually working under him. I was housing, my office was on his campus, and he had come from out of, they had brought him in and kind of built him up to be this, you know, it was a difficult school, and he was going to be the savior of the school. By 6 months in, the staff was so unhappy. They didn't feel connection. He stayed in his office pretty much all the time. He really didn't know students' names and had not connected with the staff. Didn't know even what some of the staff taught. And we're not talking a huge school. It was a middle school, but it wasn't a really large school comparatively to some. But there was no personal connection between staff and administrator, and there was no connection with administrators and students. They didn't see him, and so they didn't see him as an authority. And it was really difficult, and he didn't stay very long. So those are some things to kind of think about when we're looking at STOIC and through both the classroom lens and the leadership lens. There are 8 practices that are recommended for classrooms to have effective behavior management. And those are those 8 areas there. All of them are related. It relates academics and behavior together. And so those are the areas when we're doing walkthroughs, we kind of want to look and see, are we seeing those effective teaching and learning practices? Are the classroom expectations and rules, routines and procedures, are they posted and referred to? How do our teachers encourage expected behaviors? How do they discourage unexpected behaviors and still create a positive environment? Active supervision. Lots of teachers think they understand active supervision, but are they really being active? And how do we as leaders also structure our common areas with active supervision? Opportunities to respond. What does that look like in your classrooms when you walk through? Are students given multiple chances and multiple varieties of ways? There are some handouts too on active supervision, opportunities to respond, and all of these areas. Differentiation in the classroom, that addressing task difficulty. I know one of the places I worked where I was an assistant principal and I came in the middle of the year, they turned in lesson plans, and on their, they were weekly, and they were with their, it was at elementary school, and they, would sometimes come together to make their lesson plans as grade levels. So one of the areas was differentiation, and there wasn't a clear understanding of differentiation by many of the teachers. They also sometimes I'd have to send it back and be, this is blank. How are you differentiating? It's not just accommodations. It's not just that. It is looking at all the different learning styles and addressing groups of students with mixed groups, not the same stagnant groups too. So those are areas as you're walking through, and there's a walkthrough tool. There's a leadership packet in there. So you can kind of look back and think through, are you seeing this, and how do you use that to help guide teachers that maybe are struggling in those areas? And this role, I won't linger on this one too much, but just looking at instructional time, that's that time, the teacher's a lot for teaching, and then student engagement time, which is the learning time. Those two different parts of instruction, that's how those areas support instructional time, allowing teachers to teach much more in depth and with less interruptions. The time that students are engaged with the learning, all that active supervision, opportunities to respond, differentiation allows them to be more engaged. So looking at us as effective leaders, and we kind of talked through some of these, corrections, how we handle those, consistency as leaders. Remember, we are role modeling all of this. And I think this goes back to what we said earlier, the understanding that chronic patterns of unexpected behaviors for individual students should be considered for proactive behavior improvement plans instead of our go-to just removing or suspending. Though that's our task as leaders. We model those social emotional learning skills as well. Accountability. What does it look like? Some of our kids have never even seen an adult apologize or own something, a mistake. And so it's hard for them to know how to react when they've made a mistake. Leaders model the things that they want to see in their staff. And I think that's important too. Do we have anything in chat, or I see a little number up there? Is that?
No, I just added some of your folders.
Okay, good.
No.
All right. So we're going to get into really these specific areas and suggestions that we can provide for teachers or that we can use in our own practice. So supporting the teachers in behavior management. We talked about effective instructional practices, how academics and behavior are totally fused together. So looking at the instructional practices that are in place is a key area. If you think about behaviors being that prerequisite for academic success, and our goal in education should be to produce productive citizens who are living successful, fulfilling lives after they graduate. We really need to help students or help staff really kind of get into that mindset. It's holistic. We are preparing them for the future. What skills do you want them to have? So just thinking, what kind of skills are you hoping that, whether it's elementary going on up to and laying that foundation in elementary school up to the middle school level, or middle school going into high school, or high school leading into adulthood, what skills do you want them to take with them?
Well, for me, being that the transition from 8th grade to 9th grade is probably one of the hardest transitions ever, um, is for them to, first of all, be able to adjust socially and academically. Is going to be very different for them. In middle school, we coddle them a lot. I've worked middle school, high
Yes.
school, elementary, and when you get to high school, it's like, hey, somebody probably should have told you this is what you do because this is how it goes. We're looking for you to be more of an adult and make decisions for yourself. And not saying we're not going to help guide you along the way, but we're looking for you to start picking up the pieces. So it's also going to be for us in middle school, I think, to kind of answer the question, for us to start pulling away a little bit, but still being there and being supportive, giving them the tools that they need to be successful freshmen and starting there. Um, because it is going to be hard. I mean, you have to think you're going from the top of the food chain to the bottom of the food chain once you get to high school, and all of that's going to look very different to them. So I'm hoping that they'll leave with good ways of studying, how to take notes, um, how to balance their academic and personal life, because some of them may really get involved in sports and a job. All these things start coming as soon as you get in high school. So I'm hoping that we can really take the time to do that with them. At the high school here, they have so many great things going on with them. I mean, they're older. You could just do so much that I wish that, it's not too late for us to do. So over there, they have a test and exam, kind of like they do. It's almost like if you go to the military to see like where you are and things like that. And so they have something at the high school. And I had mentioned this in our last admin meeting, that we need to create something for middle school to see where they are now. How do we meet them where their head is right now to start developing, so when they get to high school, when they take this, it'll make sense. Like, we prepared them to get to that stage of thinking. And right now, because it's been so crazy, if I was to be honest, like just with staff turnovers, being in the classroom, it's just been a lot. We haven't been able to do that, but I do think that it's not too late. There's still time from here till May to really do that with them. I would like to see something like that.
Yeah, no. And I think some of the skills you're talking about are some of the skills, if you look at the Department of Labor and Workforce, they have skills posted that employers are looking for. And so not just academically, like they want somebody who has good computation skills, math computation, reading, they can do that. They also want self-esteem, organization, balance between work and your personal life, being able to manage personal management. They want learners who are they have adaptability and they want to learn new skills. So all of those things are things that we touch upon in some way at different levels, whether it's elementary, middle school, or high school. In some way, those are the skills they're looking for in the workforce. Those are the things that, if we can think about, I'm preparing them for the next level, high school, middle school, and then eventually, the workforce. If we can think of it like that, I think that helps maybe frame things for teachers too, as well as for us too, to kind of think about what is our goal, and brainstorming ideas like what you were just talking about. I think that's really, really important. That really establishes that link between what we're doing here. It's not in a bubble. It feels like we're in a bubble sometimes when we're in schools, our own little cloistered world, but our goal is to turn them loose someday. And I think educators are finding we have more and more of that responsibility sometimes for instilling some of those skills.
Susan?
Yes.
I just wanted to add to that the students that we're working with right now, the population we're serving, can really benefit from learning the self-regulation skills, self-advocacy. So some of our students ask you for what they need, but in a way that adults don't like to hear. So giving them the words, training them to speak up for themselves, How do you regulate your emotions? How did we get to where we are today? Right? As adults, we've all had these moments in our lives where we had to learn. Also, how to organize and keep themselves on task. So
Yes.
students with disabilities, we get that built into our plans, right? But for 80% or 90% of the population, they don't have that extra set, that intervention specialist. So I think those skills definitely help translate from middle school to high school and then high school and beyond.
Absolutely. You're
So
right.
those are like from a bigger perspective,
Mhm.
because if they can do that, then they can learn. It takes them out of that survival brain. There's so much survival brain. So
There is. And, we know that that whole frontal area is not fully developed until mid-20s. However, um, you know, again, our trauma students they haven't developed some of those pathways. Our, for lack of a better word, our typical students are still in that development process too, but their environment may not be conducive to promoting the correct ways to go about it. So I think that is absolutely right. And that's why, and I'm not going to get into too much of this right now, but social emotional learning curriculum within our schools is so important because it does teach a lot of those self-regulation skills. It's truly important for our students with special needs, but it's important for all of the students to learn those, and they can be embedded right into math, right into the general curriculum. And I think that's where sometimes teachers sometimes kind of balk against it. They're like, oh, that's one more thing I have to do. If you teach them how to embed it and what it can look like, it's really seamless. And you don't even have to have a really expensive curriculum. There are lots of free, evidence-based. There are also ways that we model SEL because we have learned it. Like you said, we have those coping strategies, the resiliency. So we model it for them, and that's the embedding of those skills as well too. So good points, Kelly. I agree. UDL, Universal Design and Learning, and high quality instruction. We talked about high quality instruction being so key to behavior management. These tools are also in your handouts. CATS.org. If you haven't really explored that with your teachers, the UDL, they have some wonderful, I think they have webinars on there. I think they have ideas for PD. They have tools and resources that really help to enrich that learning experience. Again, empowering the teachers to dig deeper into how they deliver the curriculum. And are they hitting all of those spots as far as differentiation and planning for different learning styles? So these are that's a really good website. And it's also, the resources that I put in there are just a hint of what they have, but I think they're good to kind of go through with our teachers and talk about how they're engaging in the lesson, how it's presented to the learners, and the different learning styles. Some teachers are very well versed in UDL, and some you may be speaking Greek to. They haven't had that training. And so providing them tools and resources on how to achieve that high quality instruction, I think is truly important as well. Also, just kind of getting into that classroom dynamic, lots of times we still have educators, and I think we're moving away from this, but those misperceptions around student achievement. There are, again, going back to our biases, we have to help and support teachers in getting around these myths. Also looking, do we have any of these? I've heard teachers say, what can we do with him? He comes from such a dysfunctional, uncooperative family. His background, well, you can't change that. You have to look at what you can work on changing. Again, the trauma, yes, you do want to take all the trauma when you have that information. And I always tell teachers, assume that you have a good deal of your population sitting in your seats in your classroom who have experienced trauma in some way. So when we prepare for a trauma-informed classroom or trauma-informed responses. For all students, we're making a safe environment. But we still give corrections, and we still have high expectations. Just because they've been through trauma doesn't mean they can't succeed. They can't reach high levels, and they can't learn skills. So they want that safety of being that consistent, the consistent boundaries. And when we cut slack, sometimes we're taking away that safety. So that's just some things to consider too when you're looking at the staff, when you're in classrooms. Hopefully nobody's going around saying they can't teach somebody, but just being, maybe there's an implicit bias there, or you're seeing it in the way that they're approaching the instruction. Whoops. Again, I'm not going to dwell on this, but going back to UDL, task difficulty and differentiation, very important for teachers to understand. Behaviors, if you have a student that is bored, they are going to probably have behaviors. If they are lacking in the academic skill and not being supported, you're going to see behaviors. So understanding and how to efficiently address differentiation, how they can design that classroom and that delivery of instruction to work with all kinds of students, offering varieties. That's really, really important. Opportunities to respond, and you have a handout on this, I think I mentioned. When you walk into classrooms, are you seeing verbal strategies that are variety and there are opportunities that are plentiful? Are you seeing nonverbal strategies being used? Those kind of things engage lots of different brains. They keep students engaged, and engaged students are less apt to have inappropriate behaviors. So really looking at how many times students are given that opportunity, how they're given that opportunity, another important concept. On the right-hand side, I've kind of got listed the intensity that you should see opportunities to respond. So if they've got new material they're going over, they should have 4 to 6 opportunities with 80% accuracy when you're going over material. So if it's review material, 8 to 12 opportunities to respond to that new concept with 90% accuracy. And that kind of indicates you're reaching that successful learning stage. The structure of the environment, that helps to foster that positivity. And there are some handouts on helping teachers plan for space. If teachers have pathways in their room where, the supplies, and I know space can get a little tricky sometimes, but really looking at how you can utilize that space efficiently to promote structure. If you've got materials where kids have to go get materials and it's right bumped up to desks, you're probably going to have behaviors. If you can't physically change that space, it's small, then you have to look at your procedures, and we're going to get into procedures. So really looking at what does their environment look like? Do they have way too many stimulating things on the wall? Is it not pertinent information? Those kind of things can be very distracting to our kids who struggle with ADHD or even trauma kids. Making sure that it is a positive environment, that not sterile, but it is organized well. Attention signals. So we see this a lot at elementary level. The teacher has their signal they do with the class to get their attention, but it can also work in secondary too, and it works very well. And there is actually, I'm going to advocate for a reason to use the attention signal. Your attention signal should traverse all areas. If, for instance, when teachers use flickering of the lights to get attention, that's not going to work if you're on a field trip. It's not going to work on the playground. It's not going to work if you're at an assembly or something. You have to think, what can I use that is understood by all my students to get their attention? It's a safety, there are safety reasons as well. So you really have to look at is that being utilized? Not just elementary, but secondary. And it also kind of has to fit their personality, especially secondary. I had a teacher I worked with one time that he used, that Red Robin commercial, that Red Robin. He would say that, and the kids would respond with, so you can get creative at the secondary level to make it a fun response, a cooler response. It has to fit the teacher's personality, of course. But I think it's really important from creating that safe and positive climate and being able to communicate with your whole group. But that takes direct and implicit teaching and practice from students too. We talked a little bit about the active supervision. This is where teachers, I'm actively supervising my classroom. I know what goes on. Unless they're up scanning, moving around and engaging, that's not active supervision. I know you both know that. So I think making sure our teachers are aware of what active supervision means. The students really should feel like that the teacher sees everything, that we as leaders, we see everything. We're watching, but it's a supportive way. So not a, aha, I'm going to catch you. It's more of that I'm here and I am in charge and able to keep you safe and on the path to success. So I think that, students test boundaries. If that behavior is corrected immediately, that helps establish that role of the empowered teacher. And that active supervision is also allowing those relationships to be built too, that rapport. So really, when we walk in classrooms, what does active supervision look like? As leaders, what does it look like in our shared spaces, our common areas? Kind of reevaluating, are there areas for improvement in that as well? I know I'm going kind of fast because I want to make sure we get through things, but if you want to stop or you have a question, make sure you jump in. Reflection is something that educators, well, all of us should be doing frequently, but making sure that educators are reflecting on their practices, their delivery of instruction. Is it their presentation style? Is it effectively reaching all students? Really evaluating those opportunities to respond. And there are teachers' self reflections where they can kind of check off, how many times am I responding? Or have somebody tally that for them if they need that feedback. Looking at how often they provide the feedback to the students. All of those things are really important. And as leaders, we need to encourage our teachers to reflect not just at the beginning of the year when they're setting up things, and maybe not just at the end of the year or when they're meeting in their subgroups, but frequently to make sure things are still going smoothly. So now we're going to get into the establishing the expectations in the classroom, which is really that key factor, procedures and routines. So what does this look like when it's done with fidelity and with connection? I think this is a mind shift in how we respond to discipline, but we really need to look at it as an instructional process, going back to teaching. What needs to be taught? What needs are not being met that we need to address, and gaps we need to fill. So making sure, and I know different schools are in different stages of implementation with PBIS at the tier 1 level. Some schools I've been in have little bits and pieces here and there. They may have school-wide expectations and rules, but they're not posted very often, and they're not referred to consistently. They're not applicable in all of their common areas. They need to be. That is key to supporting your classroom models and expectations. So really looking at what exists in your district, what exists in your buildings. And it can vary from building to building, obviously, but having some sort of expectation that there are school-wide rules and expectations and how they're utilized is important. And they should be based on these 5 areas and presented frequently through modeling techniques, direct instruction. And they should be able to be simple and remembered by all the staff and students. And there's a sample matrix from an elementary school. I can't remember, this one may be the middle school, and I can't remember now, but it's an example of what that matrix looks like. And they've used ROARS for their acronym up there. But their core, every student, every staff should be able to know respect, ownership, attitude, responsibility, and safety. Do they have these things posted throughout the buildings? Are they referred to? Are they applicable to all the common areas? If you look on this one, it shows what respect should look like in the bathroom, the classroom, attitudes in the hallway. These should be where students can refer to and where teachers can correct fluently by referring back to those in those common areas. So that leads into the classroom. If you have those school-wide expectations set, that really aids in helping your classroom teachers set theirs, because they should reflect back. Encouraging your teachers to have that classroom management plan provides that framework that they can work from in creating their own classroom expectations and rules. And that's key. I know a lot of times at the beginning of the year, I don't know if you all use these, but I have seen schools where they require a classroom management plan to be turned in at the beginning of the year and have it on file. If that happens, what I also see sometimes is it's a box checked, it's turned in and then forgotten, or there's not much reflection put into it. It really should be a reflection of the needs and priorities of your classroom and your students. The school-wide expectations apply everywhere to everybody. You're going to connect those back into your classroom, but they are going to meet the needs of your classroom. So really thinking through this process and then referring back to seeing if it still meets the needs of you and your students, that's really important. And that's where having those be living documents is important, not just a box checked. And there are samples of those in the handouts as well. You can find them pretty much on the internet, anywhere, one that'll fit. But this is showing just that connection for school-wide expectations to classroom expectations. Teachers can find, responsibility. Well, what's that look like in the classroom? What does that look like in their classroom for ownership, respect, or whatever you're using school-wide? But keeping that connection and that fidelity to the school-wide expectations is really key, because that's that common language. I can go to Ms. Johnson's class and then to Mr. Edwards' class, and the expectations may look a little different because their learning environment may look a little different, their subjects, but it links back to the core expectations of the school. And that's that common language that kids and staff members can refer back to. So if teachers are identifying 3 to 5 classroom rules that are used as that basis, they need to be stated positively. Instead of saying no fighting, keeping hands to self, hands and arms to, or hands and body parts to yourself is much more explicit. Fighting, that no fighting is not the positive statement. By telling them keeping your hands and feet to yourself, we're telling them what we do want to do. It's a positive statement. So that's kind of how that works together. Observable. Can you actually see the student successfully executing that behavior and that expectation? So kind coming to class prepared with materials versus be your best self. Be your best self. Well, that's very broad and very vague. We're telling them exactly what we want them to do and what we expect to follow, being ready and responsible, whatever your word's going to be. You need that teaching of direct instruction and the direct explicit instruction and modeling is important. And also making sure those rules that you choose for your classroom or the teachers are choosing, those are applicable throughout the class. So if you have remain in your seat until you are told or given permission to leave, is that kind of expectation for movement going to apply to small group? Do they have to sit there in their seat in small group until they're told to leave? Or is remain in your area a much more appropriate way to put that, a much more observable, measurable way that students will understand? Your area for small group is here. Well, then they can refer back, I'm supposed to stay here. If your directive is just stay in one place, then that's not going to apply throughout the classroom. And I know we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly. There's a sample behavior matrix. You can see how it goes back to their core over here and the spot. And it shows exactly what the expectations are for every single routine they have in the classroom or the priority areas that they feel they need to address. Remembering procedures break down the expected classroom behaviors into teachable steps, and the routines are the habits. So there's a list in there, and for possible areas of consideration, whole group may be one, seat work, small group activities. How does that look for obtaining help? Different things. The handout in the sheet in your handouts goes into this much more deeply and has a lot of suggestions for teachers to kind of think about. There's some examples. The routines and procedures is an engagement where kids can kind of work through that with you or with the teachers. You can see where they've posted routines and then they've posted the procedures for those routines. So we don't have a whole lot of time really to reflect and share, but if you can kind of reflect in your head about areas that maybe you see in classrooms that need maybe addressing or where they're not being addressed, those are the kind of things that we want to maybe help teachers prioritize. So we can't assume that kids know. We have to teach them explicitly that proactive management. We have to look at this as an instructional process. So the skills that that educators can teach in their classrooms address those gaps, like the skills that are going to show them what does responsibility look like? How do I respectfully disagree? These are things where kids don't know sometimes. We can't assume they know. Creating a behavioral lesson plan, there's a template in there for that. There's several templates, I believe. These are the things that a teacher would go through, like we create lesson plans for academics, having a behavioral lesson plan to teach those skills, truly important. And going through the tell phase, having discussions about why things are important is key. The show phase, are you going to use T-charts, videos? How are you going to demonstrate that? And then modeling the skills with student participation. I would suggest teachers demonstrate the inappropriate behavior and let the students then show the appropriate behaviors. Otherwise, they can get out of hand. They can come up with all kinds of inappropriate. And then we're checking for understanding. Again, these are some of the instructional tools that can be used, visual aids to use in your explicit instruction, demonstrations, providing those opportunities to practice once you've taught that skill, and then reinforcement can be a Kahoot. a quiz, a competition, a Jeopardy. There's a Jeopardy template in there. All those things can help teachers go back and refresh their expectations and skills. I don't think we have time to show the video, but I'll put this in. I don't think this is in your linked. This one, it just kind of shows where the students had a hand in creating the video of the do's and the don'ts. Here's the inappropriate behavior and here's the appropriate behavior. Here's what we expect according to our school-wide expectations or our classroom expectations. That can be an engaging activity. Also helping teachers understand they need a schedule where they can look at, when am I going to teach the skills? How am I going to teach the skills? And in what order, or how I'm going to do refreshers. This kind of list, first week, second week, and then understanding that there are teachable moments where you may need to stop and reteach something to the whole group. So really encouraging them to look at the points in the school year where they would need to reinforce and teach and how they're going to go about creating time for that. Again, we don't have time for the reflection part, but really thinking about what's in your building right now or your classrooms. Are those expectations posted? Those kind of things. Are there teachers that are struggling with that? Is there consistency and a connection to school-wide structures? So also encouraging expected behaviors and unexpected behaviors, praise and feedback. So all students should have some sort of non-contingent attention. It's not based on student behavior and given several times per day to develop that relationship and that rapport and that self-esteem. Positive feedback, praise given on a regular basis for following the expectations and the rules that students are modeling, praise them for it, show them in some way that they are achieving that level of success. Those intentional things, instead of just saying great job, we want to look at specifically, and I've highlighted the specific praise and how it connects to the school and the classroom core expectations. So you can kind of look at those and see that differs a lot from just, hey, that was great. They need to know what was great. That reinforces it. So building relationships, we said that's key. 4-to-1 positive interactions for every negative interaction. So every correction, you want to have 4 positives. And students from trauma, if you know you have those students, you may need to increase that ratio. Oops. Active listening, we talked about that earlier. And collaborating with students, just like, I can't remember if it was Kelly or if it was Andrea, the collaborating and that with students to problem solve gives ownership and teaches advocacy skills as well. 2x10 conversations, teachers and administrators can use this to build relationships. 2 minutes per day per 10 days with an at-risk student, and just let them talk about what they want to talk about. We listen and we engage them. Embedded SEL, having things like this help to build relationships. It also helps to identify problems. This is a middle school where they have students put Post-it notes as they walk in the room. So after getting the class started, the teacher can then look back and see, okay, that student is not feeling well, and maybe I need to check in with them. This is another video. What's interesting, if you have a chance to go back and watch this one, this is an elementary school teacher, and we've seen the handshakes and that kind of thing. What I really want you to notice on that good morning sign are choices for students. A student may feel like a hug one day, and then the next day they don't want a hug. They want a high five, or they just want to dance. And she does a variety of things and gives choices at the beginning of the day. It's also a way for her to notice, is somebody off that day? Discouraging the unexpected behaviors. Here are some suggestions for that. Pre-correcting, and reminding of expectations throughout the day, referring back to the posters on the wall. That's really important. It helps to discourage the unexpected behaviors. And you can kind of look through those. That planning for inappropriate behaviors is really important. Plan ahead. What do you think could happen? Have that in your management plan. Have students know the consequences for infractions. And consistently and immediately and calmly. Very important. This is just understanding the ABCs. So this is that planning ahead. If you know that a child's going to be demanding candy and you're in the candy line at the grocery, and then the behavior, as a parent, you're giving that child candy, well, it stops the screaming. But how do you prevent that in the first place? Choosing a candy-free checkout line, engaging your child during the line. And then your consequence is you avoid that tantrum, and you also are creating relationship with your child. So that kind of is that pre-planning as it applies to behavior in the classroom too, and getting teachers to think ahead. That teacher tool is in your handouts. That kind of goes through ways to discourage the inappropriate behaviors. We're not going to do this right now, but this is a little activity where you can kind of see what strategies and have an idea of why. Resources and strategies. This is a whole list of things that you can encourage your teachers to use. I know we're right against the clock now. I'm like 6 minutes over. So if you need to jump off, that's okay. This stuff is in there, and then you can always reach out to me with questions. Emotional check-ins that take what you need is a little board that's up to provide students with positive reinforcement and inspiration for the day when they're struggling. Using the zones of regulation to help gauge student emotional status when they come in. There's an emotional check-in for more of a secondary look. Using thermometers to help students, the perfect volume. This one, that student that's really loud. There are other secondary tools out there too that you can find for volume or blurting out. This one over here is a little more advanced, and this was for our young children using pictures to help them kind of identify if they don't know what they're feeling and how to express it. It's hard to get them into that regulated state. Calming tools and strategies, you have these in your packet too. Having a station in your room where they can be taught how to utilize the breathing. You may do it for a whole class. Individual students can benefit from it too. And also thinking about the answers to the questions that are there. Choices for calming, what they can choose. I'm in charge of me. It gives them ownership of their behavior. Brain breaks. I know we think of this as elementary, but they are an opportunity to develop and apply social competence. It allows, I need a brain break sometimes. If I'm sitting working on a project or trying to work at something in the office and I've been sitting there for 2 hours trying to get through something, I have to get up and go look at a different wall. I have to take a walk. Offering these to children is important at all ages. Here's some ideas. You can look through these. The train your brain is actually very difficult, but it gets the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere working together. So sometimes kids just need that break, and it's kinesthetic as well. There's a jigsaw jumble. These can be all levels. And then what is that? That's an interesting one too, because teachers, this is, I believe, a science teacher. That actually is I forget what the name is. Those are birds in the sky. So he used that brain break. It's not in the curriculum, but it's related to a subject area, and it allows students to use their creative thinking juices to guess what it is, and then explaining what it is also educational. Rest and reflect. I know an elementary teacher who uses this when they come in for recess to get them refocused. They close their eyes, she has some lights where they can kind of stare at, and she has calming music and just some positive messages. Self-regulation sheets can help students really think about how they reacted and the reflections. I think I've got some of those in there, easy to find on the internet too, but really good for sitting down with students who need to stop and think about things. This is one I've used in the classroom a lot. Lots of times behaviors come from being hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. Think about adults. We as adults, if I'm hungry, I'm probably a little hangry like Betty White. If I'm holding on to anger, I'm not going to be focused well on what the task is at hand. If I haven't had contact with somebody and that loneliness is there, I may need to connect with somebody. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I didn't get sleep. Some of our kids sometimes end up going to hospitals or they're moving around a lot. If they need a nap to reboot, can we not offer that in some way to them to get them back into learning with boundaries? So I've seen that snap kids right back into the learning process. But teaching kids HALT, teaching them to identify what might be at the root of their problem is also a skill that they can take into adulthood, because we all need to be aware of those and how they affect our ability to function. The music box is another one. It's a whole class kind of signal when students are off task. This is a music box the teacher bought, and she raises it if they start to get off task and then shuts it. If there's music at the end of the day, the kids all know they get some sort of reward. It may be some extra time or a task of their choosing, but it's a whole group incentive. Using a routine as structuring the daily schedule, important, posting that schedule. I want we all have calendars. Kids want to see what's coming up as well. That gives some sort of sense of safety as well too. And if you have these consistent things in here, these promote self-awareness, self-regulation, and relationship building. One of the most important things as educators, as leaders, I think, is if we can be at the door greeting students, if we're in the hallways during transitions and talking with students. We see you and we recognize you. Very important. Oops.
You can say that again. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's just so important. That visibility is huge. There's a Jeopardy template in there for teachers to use, and so they don't have to start from scratch, but it's in there, and they can create reviews of the expectations. You can put them on teams and have them compete. It's a good incentive for revisiting expectations throughout the year and making it fun. Kahoot's good for that as well. Grounding exercise, you can use this whole class or with individual students. If they are just not present in the moment, if they're struggling with that attention, identifying the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 can help root us back into the present and into the task at hand. It can help calm anxiety as well and help them feel a little more grounded and in touch. So you can teach that as a whole class unit, or you can work with individual students as well, like I said. Okay, so there are some other resources I didn't put in the PowerPoint that are in the handouts, strategies, things we can share with teachers. But really now, I know we're over our time, but thinking about what the next steps are. Where can you maybe start? Either working with your team of administration or working with a team that exists in the school to maybe look at where you can shore up that foundation. That really is that next step. And if students are still exhibiting unexpected behaviors in the classroom that are inappropriate, we need to kind of look through that and say, are these major or minor infractions? Well, if they're major behaviors, how many students are involved? Minor infractions, it may just be that we need to refresh and revisit expectations. But the major ones, we really need to look at how many students are actually involved in this chronic issue that we're seeing. If there are many, we have to then look and help coach our teachers to look at have processes been reviewed and adjusted? Have you made the universal adjustments at your classroom level that fit the needs of your students? That may be why you have many, because something is, that stool's out of place, something's not working. And going back to that behavior management plan, what did you plan for and what's your reality? And then how are you going to make those adjustments? If it's few, that's where you may need to say, I need some help. There may be higher levels of supports needed for these students. And the earlier we work at correcting those behaviors or getting involved with them, the less we're going to see students removed from the classroom in the learning environment. So I hope for today you were able to take away one of these or all of these. I think one key concept that to keep in mind is behavior happens in front of you, not to you. You were talking about the one teacher that had such an issue. It's sometimes helpful to remind teachers, we can't take it personally. This behavior is happening in front of you. It's a teachable moment. It's not personal. Most of the time, it is not personal. It is just the only way they know to communicate that need or that lagging skill. And also, as leaders, we have to know that we don't have all the answers, and that's why it's important to network and brainstorm and bring together groups of people from different backgrounds. And we are the ones that help guide and make those decisions for the trajectory, but with input from other people, it is a much easier task. And collaboration is so important there. So as a leader, we create culture, and culture drives behavior, and behavior produces results. How are you going to create positive change in your environment, in the areas that you have been empowered to address? And how can you help empower teachers? That's what I want to kind of leave you with as far as reflection today. There are some resources and all of these sites. So Cali has great stuff. There's great training in ohiopbis.org. They redid some things. So great resources there to help drive PD, to help drive your implementation of things. And of course, we have ongoing coaching here. Tara Fenton and TJ Wendt are also, they are devoted completely to PBIS. I do PBIS and special education. But reaching out to any one of us, you can go to the website and put in a PD request. And we can answer questions or help you develop plans, help get the PBIS framework up and running in your buildings as well. So from developing teams to the expectations and everything that goes with it. There is the survey link. I'm sorry we went over time, but I'm glad you all stayed with me. Do you all have any questions or any input or anything that, like I said, this was more of the broad, a longer training. We get into a lot of de-escalation and different things and what that might look like. But do you all have any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share?
I just want to say this was wonderful. I think this was actually perfect timing for me because I've been coaching one of my math teachers, 8th grade math teacher, and he's been kind of struggling with classroom transition, classroom setup, like it's just everything. So we have an assistant math director, and then our consultant have been working with me on different things they want to see with him. And literally everything that you just laid out is like, it was like, aha, like, oh, okay, yes, I'm moving in the right direction. You lay some more things out for me to help with him. I just told him yesterday we're going to redo his room again. This is going to be my second time. I feel bad. But it's like we're going to do 7 quads of tables. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 for each table. And we're going to look at some data, and we're going to sit the kids by high, mid, and lows so that everybody's kind of mixed up in the class at the seating. And then kind of like go from there, and then like try to have where ones talks to ones, 2s get the books for the class, fours can present the questions on the whiteboard. I ordered him some whiteboards and markers and things for those who don't want to actually speak out loud. You can still get the answer. I want to get him some index cards so he can keep names on it and a personal story about the kids on the other side so that he can relate to them relationship wise. And so when he wants to do a cold card, like, hey, I don't even need you guys to raise your hands today. I'm calling out. Go through that deck like a deck of cards and just pull them out, and then call on that person. If that person doesn't want to, say, hey, I want to use a phone call. I want to call on my friend, and they're going to answer the question, vice versa. So I'm just trying to help implement some different things in this room, get these kids talking, get them moving, because our classroom time is like 100 minutes. So that's a lot of time just sitting and they need to get up and move, and make it more student-led environment. So I hate to do it to them again, but we're going to change this room again. So this was great.
That's okay. It does take sometimes different experiments with how things might look and what's the best plan. So yeah, no, I've rearranged rooms many times. So that's great. I love those ideas. I love that enthusiasm and the way you're working with them and coaching and putting all those supports in place. That helps teachers feel so much more empowered. That's great. Wonderful.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see that he's wearing his confidence differently.
Good.
But it's like, just like I was telling somebody, you may know Spanish, but doesn't mean you want to get up and teach somebody how to say it's different, to do something like that. So we're just working with him on that. So it's been pretty cool to see the growth, and the people who come in from the outside can see it too. So that's a good feeling for him as well. So.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Wonderful. That's exactly what we like to see. Perfect.
And before I get off, I just want to say hello to Dr. Gibson. I don't know if she remembers me, but she used to be a principal at Cesar Chavez when I was a dean of students. So I've been waiting till all this was over before I gave her a shout out. I just want to say hello.
That's pretty small world. That's pretty cool.
It is, yes.
Kelly, did you have anything or thoughts or questions?
Kelly actually had to log off, Susan.
Did she have to log off? Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, I appreciate it.
Okay. And then don't forget, if you want the credit hours, the survey link is there. And I think Barry may have put it in the chat as well.
Yeah, the last link I put in there, chat, is for the survey link, and that's how you get your contact hours if you need contact hours, by filling out the survey. And then the certificate for your contact hours will be emailed to you.
It also allowed me to know where you might want some more, or your colleagues or that kind of thing, what ideas for other deeper dives, or how you'd like things presented, or topic areas that weren't covered. So if you have time to fill it out, great.
Yes, I'm going to.
Okay.
And so all of the links that were there, is this emailed to me, or I need to make sure I opened up everything before we click on?
All the links should have been emailed to you when they sent you the registration. The very first link I put in the chat, if you want to go back up, is the entire folder of everything. And Susan's got tons of resources in there. So if you go back to the very first link in the chat, it should be the entire folder if you missed it on the email.
Okay, perfect.
If you have trouble getting to it, though, just email me and let me know, and I can send some stuff over to you as well. So, or if you have questions. It sounds like great stuff. Thank you so much for being here and participating. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate all of this. It's been great.
Thank you. We'll keep up the good work.
Thank you. You guys have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.